Hi everyone, it's nice to see you all, it's nice to be here. Welcome, well, I feel like I've been seeing some of your faces all day, but if I haven't, then welcome to Sheaf Poetry Festival in collaboration with Off the Shelf. I'm Susanna Evans, so I'm one of the directors of Sheaf Poetry Festival. We're delighted to be bringing you this event, which is entitled When I Think of My Body, presenting three poets whose work engages with womanhood and the female body. Wendy Pratt's When I Think of My Body as a Horse explores motherhood and body identity within the context of baby loss. Kim Moore's forward-nominated All the Men I Never Married takes us through a gallery of exes and significant others where we encounter rage, pain, guilt and love. Rachel Long's My Darling from the Lions tells of family quirks, the perils of dating, the grip of religion and sexual awakening. Stories that are emotionally insightful, politically conscious, wise, funny and outrageous. So I'm going to introduce all of the poets individually as they come up. The three poets will all read and then we're going to have a short question and answer like little session where we sit on the stage at the end. So if you do, if a burning question does present itself to you, just make sure you hold on to it until the end because we'd love to have your questions as well. And a big thank you to Off the Shelf and the Millennium Gallery for the event. And we will now commence with Wendy Pratt, who's a poet, writer and the first female editor of Dreamcatcher magazine. She was highly commended in the Forward Prize and has won the York Mix and Prole Laureate poetry competitions. Her collections include Museum Pieces, Gifts the Mole Gave Me, and When I Think of My Body as a Horse. Please welcome Wendy.
Hi. Thank you. Can you hear me all right? Am I standing the right correct distance? We're brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for having me and thank you for turning out on this wet evening, a wet Saturday evening as well. You could have all been at the pub and instead you've come here to listen to this. And unfortunately I'm going to read from, well fortunately, I'm going to read from my current collection, When I Think of My Body as a Horse, which won the Poetry Business Book and Pamphlet Award in 2020, I think, or 2021. It's all a bit of a COVID blur. Thank you. Thank you. There were other people involved as well. There were other winners. I was one of the winners. Usually when I read from this collection, I'm reading from it as a personal story, because that's what it is. It's a personal story about my experience of infertility and IVF and baby loss and miscarriage. It's all the good stuff, it's all the fun stuff for you tonight. But tonight, because of the theme that we're working under, the politicised female body, I wanted to put some of these poems into a sort of a wider context and show you a little bit about what it's like to be an infertile woman or a childless woman in the society that we live in. So I'm going to start with a poem called The Language of Pre-Motherhood. And I'm starting with this one because I want to talk a little bit about how in the society that we live in, we have these two sort of themes going on in society. And one of them is a sort of a cult of health in which if you are not the perfect size, have the perfect body, look the right way, you are unnecessary or unworthy or some sort of sinner. And we also have a fetishism of motherhood, which does nobody any good at all. So what we end up with is mothers who feel like they can't talk about the real experience of motherhood, and infertile women or childless women, either by choice or not by choice, who are left lonely and isolated because they can be neither of these things. They can be neither the perfect body or the perfect mother. The language of pre-motherhood. I don't remember a discussion, but there must have been one. There must have been a catalyst, the thinnest slice of the thinnest razor splitting the moment when we went from being two to the imaginary three. I became immediately domesticated. I mimicked my own mother, and the mothers of my mother became more northern, stood on the step of my terraced house, nattering. I walked the baby aisles with certainty, making lists, passing the time while I waited with other pre-mothers. There was a wholesomeness to my practice. I practiced being clean as fresh sheets, clean as the hard, bright porcelain of a white, shining bathroom. And I waited meekly for my turn as one by one the others were beatified, rising up, a rapture of motherhood. All of them Marys, clutching Jesus like an F1 winner's cup, until there was no one left who spoke my language. The next poem I'm going to read is called The Circle of Sisters. And this is another one that is about isolation and is about this idea that if you are unable to procreate, if you are unable to have a baby, you are outside of this circle, outside of this society that is very, very geared towards motherhood. If you don't have, there will be people in this room, 1 in 4 people suffer infertility and go on to not have children. And some of these people in this room will have chosen childlessness as well. And the people who are suffering that will know how geared towards having children society is. And it makes it so that you are not a part, you can't fully be a part of society. And also it makes it so that your life and your body belong to somebody else. They belong to other people. IVF is very much like that anyway, because you hand over your biological processes, your biological body. But within the wider context, whenever we are facing cuts or difficulties with finances in the country, especially within the NHS, it's infertility services that go first. And I once saw someone say, I don't want my taxes going towards drawing board babies. They should be going towards proper healthcare. And I just wanted to say that I have something written down here, and it says, a 2018 study in Clinical Neuroscience magazine concluded that the number of individuals with infertility reporting psychiatric symptoms range from 25 to 60%. If you don't allow people to try and have babies with science, they go away and they become depressed, and your tax money goes on that anyway. So, do the maths. I feel like I'm having a rant. It's like I've come here to have a rant. Okay, hang on. So this is a poem called The Circle of Sisters. And I'll just say one more thing. Sorry. Even within the IVF community, when I was pregnant, I was part of a community of pregnant mothers that were partnered through IVF. We knew each other through the IVF boards and the online groups. And when I lost my baby, when she died, I fell out of that group as well. There was no way to be a part of it anymore. It was like having a door shut. I'll let the poem explain the rest. The Circle of Sisters. I fell backwards out of the circle of my sisters and found their arms tight around each other. They were facing inwards and their prams were locked like spokes on a turning wheel. They danced the dance of all the mothers in the world, and their bodies kept the rhythm in a shush and rock of linked arms and soft words. I shouted at the gaps between their cashmere soft backs, but each time I opened my mouth, the beauty and tragedy of my daughter formed. It frightened the circle. For years, I crept round the edges like a wolf, wanting them to domesticate me, but they sensed a danger in my shape and shooed and hissed. I became an embarrassment. I was no longer a sister of the circle, but my body couldn't forget their dance, so I danced in the shadow of my sisters and shouted my daughter's story through the gaps. It's all quite depressing, and it's not going to get any happier. I'm really sorry. So the next poem I've got is a poem called Schrodinger's Baby, and it is about I need to give you a trigger warning for this one because it is quite brutal. And it is about the situation in which you find yourself constantly waiting to have a baby that may or may not come, that may or may not happen. And it is a weird and strange place to be in because it goes on for years. If you are having IVF, your whole life is on hold. You can't plan for anything. You can't go on holiday. You can't do any of the things that normal people do. And your body still, again, becomes the property of other people. Other people want to ask these intimate questions about how the IVF is going. And they're being very good-natured, really. But, they wouldn't ask someone who was trying naturally to have a baby how often they're having sex or what it was like or, do you think you've been successful? So this is called Schrodinger's baby. Schrodinger's baby is both alive and dead, both a stillbirth and a resuscitation attempt, in a box, on a slab, in my arms, in a basket, in a bag, all of these. Schrodinger's baby doesn't go into the ground with my dead daughter. Schrodinger's baby continues to exist in the paperwork of the IVF clinic, in the perfume you are not allowed to wear, in the vitamin pills, the weight gain. Schrodinger's baby is even laid flat and blue in the negative pregnancy test. Schrodinger's baby crucifies herself in red on the chart stuck to the wardrobe door. This on-off, yes-no baby is swaddled in this time next year, and this might be the last Christmas with just us two, and make the most of the time because, and you'll miss the sleep and lie-ins, and at least you can have fun trying. And some babies are just quiet, and your baby is measuring too small, and I'm sorry she didn't make it. Schrodinger's baby is in the drawers of unworn nappies, the cot bedding. Schrodinger's baby is morphine, is wine, is vodka, is dieting, is running and running. One day, in that dark box full of atoms and nuclear potential, Schrodinger's baby dies for real. Schrodinger's baby's mother escapes in a tide of grief in which she is both alive and dead also. And there is never an answer to anything, and the box is too small for this half-life, and the box was always too small for this half-life. I told you it was going to be brutal. I've got another really depressing one for you. This is going back to talking about this idea that you can save this money through not paying for infertility, for not funding infertility in the country, because IVF is not an easy answer to anything. It is a desperate situation. It's something that you do because you want a baby. One of the things that happens when you are infertile, if you are trying for a baby, if you are having IVF, is people start to give you opinions on whether you should adopt or not. But the adoption process is also brutal and awful and, goes into your personal life and asks questions of you as a parent, a potential parent, that I have to say as well, not many people know that if you want to go through IVF, you have to go to your GP and have them sign a paper that says that they think you are good enough to be a parent, that they think you are going to be capable as a parent. My GP, who sees me twice a year, why would they know? Nobody else has to do this. You are already ostracised, you're already singled out and on the outside of society. Wow, I am really ranting, and I do apologise. Except I don't apologise. 1 in 4 people are infertile, are struggling with infertility, and we are always the sponges of society, soaking up the things that other people don't want to deal with. That I would have to have a paper signed by my GP for me to have a baby, but other people can have baby after baby after baby and have each baby taken away. And I am all for people getting help and support, but that can happen without anyone doing anything about it, really. It just is a turning wheel. But the infertile community is then guided, pushed towards adoption as an answer to this. It's just not right. It's not right. And I did get depressed. It was a horrible time. It lasted years and years and years. We tried for 13 years altogether. We had I can't remember, 5 rounds of IVF, 1 stillbirth, except she wasn't really a stillbirth, she died during delivery, and 2 miscarriages. And we came to a point where we couldn't do it anymore. We stopped. And then we had people telling us that it was just a numbers game. We should keep going. Don't give up hope. And there again is the cult of health, because everything is about numbers, everything about hope. You can't accept anything, because if you do, you are failing. Somehow you are a biological failure. So this poem is called When There Were More Bad Days Than Good. When there were more bad days than good, I smashed into myself full force like a woman running from a fire, screaming, "My baby, my baby, my baby." Having abandoned myself at the roadside, I went looking for my body in bogs, under bridges, in crawl spaces and gas ovens. I found it crying to a receptionist. They told me that a lack of sleep was not an emergency and I couldn't come in, so I cleaved my way in like a fireman with an axe into their burning building. I demanded pills. I built a small box with a prescription and a pill-sized hammer to break into it, and I snatched the baby, my baby, from her grave and stuffed her back into myself. I went around wearing my old maternity clothes and being given Mother's Day cards and flowers. I bowed for the applause that the world gave me for being successfully pregnant and not letting my baby die in a fire or in an emergency delivery or in a failed resuscitation attempt. But it wasn't really about that. Oh, there was coffee in between and we played the game in which I was the fire burning my own house down, and the past was a long time ago. We discussed how its sparks couldn't keep igniting me if I didn't let them, and besides, there were fire blankets laid about my feet, and everyone was asking me why I didn't just use the blankets to put the fire out. But there were no instructions with the blankets, and I'd never been very good with instructions anyway, except break here in case of emergency. But I wasn't an emergency, I just couldn't sleep. That's not a true story, it's quite figurative, but it is a true story that I went quite mad in grief and got very, very depressed and didn't sleep for a very long time. And my GP told me to take up yoga and try not to be so stressed. Oh, I'm standing up here like a crazy person, ranting about this and reading these very sad poems. Eventually, like I say, we came to the conclusion that we couldn't go past a point. I got to the point where my life was just about having babies and trying to have babies and going through grief and grieving, and it was exhausting, and we stopped. We had one last IVF treatment. But the thing was that my daughter's death was partially caused by clinical negligence by the hospital that I worked in. This is just ridiculous. You couldn't make it up. It's like the plot of a novel. And it caused so much extra grief because I'd gone to the hospital when I was pregnant and they hadn't listened to me when I told them that there was something wrong. So again, my body, I wasn't in charge of it. It wasn't my belonging. Nobody listened to me because I was a woman. I was a first-time mother. And I was treated like I was neurotic because I had suffered from anxiety in my notes. And that too is just another experience of women and their bodies, their biological bodies, not being their own property and being the property of other people and having your body judged by what they think rather than what you are saying is a real problem. Anyway, we stopped, and this is the last egg collection. All along the road home, the trees shed their leaves like breadcrumbs. We have lost again, I know, before the charade of the 2-week wait is over. There is no happy ending, not here. This is not a Disney fairy tale. This is 100% grim, a woodcut forest and a gingerbread house, and I am the witch, or I am the oven stoked with hot coals, burning children. I am done. I've only got 2 more poems, and I promise not to rant through them. Oh, I do feel like I am ranting a bit. And it's not that I am trying to shame mothers or society for being child-orientated. It's obviously right for children to be at the centre of things because they are the next generation. I want children to be looked after. But what happens is, because of this situation, if you are childless, you are judged to be somehow not a part of society. I have this other quote here. Andrew Leadson, you might remember, who was in competition with Theresa May in 2006 for the Tory leadership, who said about Theresa May, who didn't have children, who was childless, "Genuinely, I feel that being a mum means you have a real stake in the future of the country, a tangible stake. She possibly has nieces, nephews, lots of people, but I have children who are going to have children who will directly be part of what comes next. Thanks very much. I just bin myself." And Nicola Sturgeon, who had to eventually admit that she'd had a miscarriage because people were hounding her about her childless status. It is not like being a pioneer. When we stopped trying, it was very, very difficult to let go of the personality that was part of having a baby and this idea that I was going to be a mother. I thought I was going to be a mother. And it was like I was waiting to fill this form. This form was always waiting for me. I tried to go into it and it just couldn't be filled. So when we stopped, it took a lot to change how I thought about things. It's not like being a pioneer. The first year of acceptance is like living in a foreign country. It is a form of abstinence. I've scooped her out, stopped pretending that she might still be with me. In her place, there is a sound which follows me, something like the knock of wooden wind chimes or the rolling dullness of an empty gourd. My womb feels fit to fall straight out without the benefit of little heartbeats. It has no veins around it beating and containing it. I am free to eat out, free to spend my money on knickknacks and trivia, alcohol and clothes. I can go forward like a pioneer and settle the land for the childless ones that will follow, but still I speak the language of hope. Still I find the future knitted with potential miracles. I almost turn back to a place where I at least recognise the language, even if I don't understand it. And what I found was that people would come up to me, people who had children, and they would say to me, "Oh, you know," they were trying to make me feel better, bless them. "You know, it's not the it's not the be-all and end-all of having children. If I could go back and change my mind, I would." And I'd be like, "Bloody hell, don't let your children hear you say that. That's really awful." And they would say, you know, "Oh, you can go on holiday, you can go where you like, you can lie in bed on a Saturday morning." It was not helpful. It didn't really help. However, I have to say I am childless, sort of by choice because we decided to stop trying, and I bloody love my life. I love my life. I'm in a really good place. I'm really happy. I have a great husband and a good career, and I'm happy with my dog and my rabbit and my guinea pigs and my chickens. Not that I'm trying to fill a hole or anything in my life, maternal hole. And I have a very full and fulfilled life. You can be whole without children, and I am whole without children. And I want that to be part of this conversation as well, because you don't just stop existing. People pity you and say, "Oh, you can't really know true love until you have true children. You can't be tired until you've got children." And I think, oh, fuck off. Just fuck off. Going back to the cult of health, I blamed my body for a long time. I was very angry with myself. And then I decided to forgive myself and forgive my body and work with it. When I think of my body as a horse, now I think of my body as a horse. I think of it not as a vessel for my soul or as an organic robot or a means of transport, but as another thing I need to love and care for. We do not share a language. When my body asks for rest, I have to know the signs, have to watch the way its elegant legs stutter when it's tired. All those years I tried to train it by punishment. How I hated its disobedience, how I felt ashamed of it, poor body. I tried to cut myself away from it. I scarred it, I starved it, I taught it to be afraid of mirrors, I taught it a language of pain. Now my body is a horse. I see it is loyal. It is incredible. I line all the bones of my body up from the nasal bone to the thin string of tail, and marvel at its complexity. I do not blame it for lost babies. It did its best. I do not blame myself for lost babies. I did my best. I ride my body in a slow companionship, comforting it at the end of the day, and I say, body, you are beautiful. You are beautiful. Thank you for listening to me rant.
Thank you so much, Wendy. Such powerful poems for their sadness, but also the anger they contain as well. That you managed to make poetry out of those like incredibly difficult feelings is such an achievement, I think. Thank you. Okay, so our third and final poet. Remember, there's a Q&A. Keep thinking of questions. Is I don't know why I did that. Sorry. Is Kim Moore, a poet and writer of non-fiction. Her pamphlet was a winner in the 2011 Poetry Business Book and Pamphlet Competition, and her collection, The Art of Falling, won the Geoffrey Faber Memorial Prize. All the Men I Never Married, which is Kim's newest collection, both published by Seren. Books are All the Men I Never Married is currently shortlisted for the Forward Prize for Best Collection, which I guess we must find out about soon. But so that's exciting. The 28th of November. Watch this space. Please welcome Kim.
I was going to pretend I didn't know when it was going to be announced, but just whenever. Thank you for this invite, and to read with these two poets whose books have been really important to me. I remember the first time I read Rachel Long and the first time I read Wendy Pratt. It was just kind of, both of their work just blows my mind. So I just said to them, I don't want to read now. I just want to sit and let that go in. But I'm going to, don't worry, because you want your money's worth. Okay. Can you hear okay if I stay here? We are coming under cover of darkness with our strawberry marks, our familiars, our third nipples, our ill-mannered bodies, our childhoods spent hobbled like horses, where we were told to keep our legs closed, where we sat in the light of a window and posed and waited for the makers of the world to tell us again how a woman is made. We are arriving from the narrow places, from the spaces we were given, with our curses and our spells and our solitude, with our potions we swallow to shrink as small as insects or stretch us into giants. For yes, there are giants amongst us. We must warn you. There will be riots. We're carrying all that we know about silence as we return from the forests and towers, unmaking ourselves, stepping from the pages of books, from the eye of the camera, from the cages we built for each other, the frames of paintings, from every place we were lost and afraid in. We stand at the base of our own spines and watch tree turn to bone and climb each vertebrae to crawl back into our minds. We've been out of our minds all this time, our bodies saying no, we were not born for this, dragging the snare and the wire behind us. So that's a kind of prologue poem to the book, and I imagine the kind of the snare and the wire kind of dragging into the collection. Originally, a male friend of mine told me that poem should go, or when I was putting the book together, a male friend said that should go at the end, and I did have it at the end for a while, and I was like, no, it's not. It doesn't work. It has to be at the beginning, because there's no kind of resolution. And if there was a resolution, it wouldn't be dragging a snare and a wire. Okay, so All the Men I Never Married is 48 poems, all numbered from 1 to 48, and about all the men I never married. And I was really pleased when I came up with that title, because it meant I didn't have to come up with any other title for the whole time I was writing this book. So All the Men I Never Married, number 1. There was the boy I met on the park who tasted of humbugs and wore a mustard yellow jumper, and the kickboxer with beautiful long brown hair that he tied with a band at the nape of his neck, and the one who had a constant ear infection, so I always sat on his left, and the guy who worked in an office and could only afford to fill up his car with £2 worth of petrol, and the trumpet player I loved from the moment I saw him, dancing to the Rolling Stones, and the guy who smoked weed and got more and more paranoid, whose fingers flickered and danced when he talked, and the one whose eyes were 2 pieces of winter sky, and a music producer, long-legged and full of opinions, and more trumpet players, one who was too short and not him, one who was too thin and not him. Are you judging me yet? Are you surprised? Let me tell you of the ones I never kissed, or who never kissed me. The trombonist I went drinking with, how we lay twice a week in each other's beds like 2 unlit candles. We were not for each other, and in this we were wise. We were only moving through the world together for a time. There was a double bassist who stood behind me and angled the body of his bass into mine and shadowed my hands on its neck, and all I could feel was heat from his skin and the lightest breath, and even this might have been imagined. I want to say to them now, though all we are to each other is ghosts, once you were all that I thought of. When I whisper your names, it isn't a curse or a spell or a blessing. I'm not mourning your passing or calling you here. This is something harder, like walking alone in the dusk and the leaves. This is the naming of trees. This is a series of flames. This is watching you all disappear. I always want to give an explanation to that poem and say I played the trumpet for many years and went to music college and was a trumpet teacher for about 12 years, and then I realized to defend the many trumpet plays that appear in that poem. I'm like, no, that's no defence, really. It explains nothing. Okay, so I wrote that poem after my first collection came out, when you're in that kind of pit of despair that you're never going to write another poem again, or I was in despair. And I quite enjoyed myself, so I thought, I know, just for fun, I'll write a poem for every ex-boyfriend, and the really lucky ones will get like 3 or 4 poems about them, but I'll make it out that they're all different men. And then I thought any poem with a man could be in All the Men I Never Married, so any man that irritates me is going to get a poem written about him. So it kind of grew out of all proportion and control, really. And at the same time, I also started a PhD where I wanted to write poems about experiences of everyday sexism. And the book kind of started to cross over. So it started to be about female desire, poems about female desire, and poems about sexism. And then sometimes both of those things at once were happening. I've stupidly put there you go. I've had to borrow a copy of my own book from the library because I forgot it. The library in Manchester where I was teaching yesterday, and I've only just opened it, and whoever's borrowed it has been making little underlines and little stars, so I could open a poem and there might be like an awful thing written and it'll throw me off, like what a load of, there's just 3 lines underlined here, it'll be fine. All the Men I Never Married, number 7. Imagine you're me, you're 15, the summer of 95, and you're following your sister onto the log flume, where you'll sit between the legs of a stranger. At the bottom of the drop, when you've screamed and been splashed by the water, when you're about to stand up, clamber out, the man behind reaches forward and with the back of his knuckle brushes a drop of water from your thigh. To be touched like that for the first time. And you are not innocent. You're 15. Something in you likes that you were chosen. It feels like power, though you were only the one who was touched, who was acted upon. To realize that someone can touch you without asking, without speaking, without knowing your name, without anybody seeing. You pretend that nothing has happened. You turn it to nothing. You learn that nothing is necessary armor you must carry with you. It was nothing. You must have imagined it. To be touched, and your parents waiting at the exit and smiling as you come out of the dark, and the moment being hardly worth telling. What am I saying? You're 15, and he is a man. Imagine being him on that rare day of summer. The bulge of car keys makes it difficult to sit, so he gives them to a bored attendant who chucks them in a box marked property. A girl balanced in the boat with hair to her waist, and he's close enough to smell the cream lifting in waves from her skin, her legs stretched out. And why should he tell himself no? Hold himself back. He reaches forward, brushes her thigh with a knuckle, then gets up to go, rocking the boat as he leaves. You don't remember his face or his clothes, just the drop of water, perfectly formed on your thigh before it's lifted up and away by his finger. You remember this lesson your whole life, that shiver of time, that moment in the sun. What am I saying? Nothing. Nothing happened. Virginia Woolf calls those moments that you remember and you don't know why you remember them until you write a poem about them. She calls them moments of being, which I really like. And another writer whose name I never remember, an American writer, calls them river's teeth, like the bits of wood that get stuck in a river. I should write his name down. All the Men I Never Married, number 6. This is another you poem. So I was experimenting with address because the second poem that I read when if you remember, I don't know if you remember, but in the middle of the poem I say, "Are you surprised? Are you judging me yet?" And the first time I read that poem, someone shouted yes. So I started thinking about why normally in poetry we often don't address the audience directly. We're speaking to a muse or an unseen other, an animal. Sometimes we're speaking to God. And I decided it's because we don't actually want the audience to talk back to us. But of course, so I tried to imagine you're me. I was kind of experimenting with directly talking to the audience. But you is such a slippery pronoun in poetry, I think, because sometimes it can be talking to you and sometimes it can be talking to you. But this is another you poem. But this is one of the few poems that's not... this is addressed to my twin sister. It's a story that she told me. All the Men I Never Married, number 6. That a man approached you in a nightclub. That you were polite at first, then turned your back. That he insisted on giving you his number. That you put it in your pocket. That you danced with your friend all night. That he stood and watched. That you were drinking tequila. That you licked salt from the back of your hand. That he was waiting outside. That he grabbed your arm and spun you round. That you snapped. That you've always had a temper. That you were not afraid. That you swung your fist and clipped his jaw. That he kicked you between the legs. That he shouted, "I will end you." That you fell to the pavement. That he tried to kick you again. that a bouncer came and held him back, that he shouted, "I will end you, I will end you, I will end you," that the police were called, that he vanished into the night, that you were taken to the station, that he turned up with his lawyer, that he turned up with his father, that you still hadn't sobered up, that he was smirking, that it was Freshers' Week, that you were in pain, that it was hard to explain about his number in your pocket, that now you were afraid, that you were advised not to press charges, that you hit him first, that this all happened many years ago, that you laugh about it now, that you say, "Well, I shouldn't have hit him," that I both agree and disagree with this statement, that being our bodies in public is a dangerous thing, that being in public is a dangerous thing, that our bodies are dangerous things. So this is the last poem in the book, and I wrote it after interviewing Rachel for the Forward Prize, when she was shortlisted for the Forward Prize, and we talked about writing about women's hair, writing about hair in general, and because Rachel writes brilliantly about hair, and it made me remember being a new writer and going on a residential and being told by the male tutor, I showed him a poem about my mum's hair, and he said, nobody's going to be interested in that sort of thing. It's women's business. And I chucked the poem away, and it was probably a crap poem because I just started writing, but I have no record of it because I believed him. And just that idea of permission, who gives us permission to write, and who gives us permission to write about things. So it took me 20 years to write the poem. I was just dedicating a poem to you then, Rachel. You're back just in time. So this is All the Men I Never Married, number 48. When he told me not to tell the story of my mother's hair, I was obedient for many years, until I saw the video of wild horses in Patagonia, tamed by increments over many days. The gaucho calm and still when the horse met his gaze, then shooing it as it looks away. And so the horse learns that only when it gives its whole attention to this man will it ever feel peace again. And of course, my mother is not a horse. She would never be fooled by such a trick. But maybe the man who told me not to tell is the gaucho. Maybe once I was a horse, to spend all these years listening to his voice. He told me this was women's business, that the world was not interested in such things. He said, listen to me read Eliot until you fall asleep or until the red wine runs out. And so we did, all of us who had gathered there to learn. He stood in front of the curved window. The bats crisscrossed the lawn. He did not hold a book or open his eyes to see if we were there. The room took his voice and gave it back to every corner. It felt as if he whispered in my ear. I have held my tongue for years. My mother's hair. I did as I was told. She sat for hours between my legs as if she was the child and I the mother. I straightened her hair, every curl and kink, dividing it into smaller and smaller sections. The hiss of steam, the TV in the background, my father elsewhere, and part of me still there, part of me in the library with the man who told me not to speak about such things. The lawn, the drifting dusk, the bats, my mother's hair, my hands, that house, the shudder of a horse's flank.